Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 20 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
We are, of course, reading Alan Ryan's On Politics, a book describing the history of political theory from Herodotus to the modern day. And this time we're looking at utilitarianism, primarily with John Stuart Mill, but also his father, James Stuart Mill, and sort of the founder, originator of a lot of utilitarianist thinking, Jeremy Bentham. An interesting chapter. I ended up agreeing, I think, with John Stuart Mill in more parts than I thought I would.
Really? Why is that? I guess
what he says.
You're just ignorant of his philosophy before you read this.
Yeah, usually. I mean, I had a general understanding of utilitarianism. We talked about it in Season 1, in which you complained about it at length. All, I think, valid complaints. But getting more into what he says, less about the utilitarian side of things, but other philosophies of his, I agreed with.
Well, he's got a limited utilitarianism. He's really more of a libertarian.
Yeah.
Than a pie-eyed, we could all, we can live in a perfect union type of thing. So it's, like when we talk about, utilitarians, it's a little bit different than I think.
Than John Stuart Mill.
It gets expanded and goes into weird places.
Yeah, true. Very true. But we start out talking about Godfather, Father, and Son. Alan Ryan says one of the most important roots of modern liberalism lies with the ideas of John Stuart Mill, who was influenced by his father and Jeremy Bentham. Now, Jeremy Bentham was born in 1748 and died in 1832. He was a lifelong bachelor and began as a Tory in politics, but later became an enthusiast for parliamentary reform. He thought the American colonies were a waste of money, but also thought that natural rights were nonsense. So he sort of disliked Britain keeping the colonies, but did not agree with the colonies' philosophy necessarily in their own revolution. He devoted himself to explaining how British law could be codified, how procedures could be simplified, and how the political system could be reformed. He says here, Bentham did not invent the principle of utility, though he probably did invent the phrase the greatest happiness principle. But he held that only by asking how a proposed law or system for managing, say, incarcerated prisoners or the recipients of public welfare promoted the happiness or well-being of everyone affected by it, could we know what laws to pass, what penalties to attach to their infractions, and how to administer the institutions on which society depended. And so that's essentially the core belief of utilitarianism, deciding what gives the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people.
Am I forgetting, isn't this Aristotle?
In what way?
Like, isn't that what he said was the goal of politics and the government?
I think vaguely, yeah.
Yeah, it was trying to get. I thought it was Aristotle that was trying to focus on somehow defining what is the common goal of the government is to the benefit of the most people. I mean, I don't know why John Stuart Mill was considered to be such a revolutionary thinker. It doesn't seem that unique at the time. But
I think here it's more of like defining exactly what makes people happy and trying to turn that into a science. I think that's really what makes Bentham interesting.
What makes Bentham interesting is a design of the pod system in prisons.
Panopticon. I was just about to talk about that. Because he was obsessed with prison reform, and he designed the Panopticon, which was a prison built around a central tower so that all the cells could be seen by the guards at any given time. And his utilitarian system was outlined with the principles of morals and legislation, which claimed that humanity was under two masters, pain and pleasure. And he developed the philosophic calculus to estimate the amount of pleasure or pain expected from an action. But yeah, that idea of that prison is very interesting.
Well, I mean, it's a version of it is in most prisons now, especially mental units, because they have to be under 24/7 observation, and you don't want to have one person to one person ratio of staffing. So you have one person in the middle that's supposed to be paying attention to the monitors and to you could have a direct visual of it. Yeah, but sometimes they don't pay attention, and Epstein didn't kill himself.
So that's a good way to slip that in there. That's good.
Because they're supposed to be watching. Here's a suicide risk. Yeah, I bet. Suicide by other means.
That's fantastic.
The other means is somebody's hands around his neck. Snap.
But Bentham took.
Isn't that amazing that everybody understands that was not a suicide? Yeah. I don't think there's anybody that really thinks, oh, come on, that guy really killed himself. I don't think there's anybody in the world that really thinks that.
No, not at all.
And they got away with it.
They're still getting away with it.
I know.
Yeah. All right, on to James Stuart Mill, I guess.
I bet you our next president could get elected just by having a campaign. He's going to find out who killed Jeffrey Epstein and prosecute everybody and release the black book or whatever he had of sexual depravity. Probably. Of course, then he'll have to commit suicide too.
That's true. That's true.
Anyway, on to back to the subject.
Yes, Bentham took on James Stuart Mill as his secretary and general assistant. James Stuart Mill was born in 1773 and died in 1836, and he was more political than Bentham. He was the senior civil servant in the London office of the corporation that governed India, the West India Corporation, or the East India Corporation, not the West. That is the
they were always
direction.
At war.
Yes. But he was a major figure among the philosophical radicals determined on modernization. His essay, Government, published in the Encyclopedia Britannica in 1818, stated that we all naturally attempt to pursue our own interests, but we need government to coordinate activities, make law, and repress crime. But he said the central problem is reconciling the interests of the public with the interests of those who hold power, and therefore a system of representation is necessary. He argued that the interests of women were included with the interests of their husbands and fathers, and men under 40 had the same interest as men over 40, so therefore only men over 40 in the middle class should have the power to vote. So very much limiting the ability of people to vote there.
There's a certain amount of logic to some of that.
Please explain.
Well, I mean, I think he laid it out there, but you're kind of on the same team.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really explain why single women would not vote. Like married women, you'd say, well, you're a team. Yeah. And maybe individuals should get one vote, and a married couple would get one vote. Of course, that would just make all the sad single married. How do you say? How do you say? What's the term?
What you're thinking for.
What's the term for women that no one will marry? Spinster used to be what it was called, but it was. I'll think of it later after the podcast is over. But no, I mean, that was what their kind of their belief was, is that women were part of the. Well, they're represented by their father when they're young, and then they're represented by their husband when they're older, and therefore they can express their opinions to their spouse or their dad, and then that'll be their vote within the family, I guess. Yeah. But it doesn't really make any sense.
That is true. But he kind of concludes this section by acknowledging the three important issues in utilitarianism, and that is the relationship between freedom and happiness, the relationship between politics and administration, and the ambiguous individualism of utilitarian ethics and politics. How much does the individual actually play in if you're just looking at, people essentially as statistics of happiness, and things like that. So it's the big issues that then John Stuart Mill focuses on.
Well, I think, you skipped over one thing, I think.
Go ahead and fill it
in. Where he mentioned something I thought was pretty good, that persons with the power to do good by the means of the government or other means also have the power to do harm, and just recognizing that we're not utopians. That if the government can do, or a group of people can do good, that also means they necessarily have the power to do bad. And I think that's an important part of utilitarian calculations and in a more libertarian view of government.
True.
The more power you give the government, the more bad they can do. They say, well, they're going to do great things. They're going to bring all these people out of poverty. Well, you're going to, whatever power you give them can also do harm, maybe even do more harm. Yeah. And I think that's borne out with a lot of government interventions.
Very true.
Yeah. What was a joke I heard yesterday? Like LBJ declared war on poverty, and the poor lost. I mean, it's true.
That's really funny.
We beat them down.
Then we turn to Mill's autobiography. And John Stuart Mill was born in London in 1806 and died in Avignon, France in 1873, and he left a detailed autobiography to be published after his death. And a big feature of this autobiography was his education, which was in Benthamism, in a rational education of history, philosophy, and political economy. He later followed his father into the East India Company at age 16, served as an MP from 1865 to 1868, 30 years after joining the East India Company.
And he must have been some sort of little genius, because he knows Greek by what?
Yeah, I was
3?
about to...
Oh, I'm sorry.
About to mention that.
Steal your thunder. Go ahead.
But he believed that it was very much possible to teach children vastly more than what the parents in schools attempted at the time. He himself learned Greek at 3, Latin at age 6, and read much classical and modern history, and then began reading logic and political economy at the age of 12. So yeah, very much from very early on, diving into very complex things. And the method of teaching was interesting. He was taught by asking questions, not by providing answers. I'm going to read here just a short section from the book. He says, Mill was encouraged to ask questions about everything he read and discouraged from accepting any answer with which he was not satisfied. Such brutalities as his education contained were accidental. One of James Mill's ideas was that his son's progress could be assessed by setting him the task of teaching his sisters and seeing how much they had learned, which is interesting, seeing how much you had learned by your ability to pass it on to other people, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's the dumbest idea that they could have come up with. Well, first of all, John Stuart Mill is obviously a genius. Mm-hmm. So, a genius can only teach somebody who's... you're not supposed to use the term mentally impaired so much. So how can you judge the genius by what this mentally impaired person can learn? That's just stupid.
True.
And also, he suffers the same problem that a lot of really smart people, the same mistake a lot of the smart people make is that, if it works for me, it's going to work for everybody. Mm-hmm. And so we should be able to learn a lot more and a lot faster. And they lose patience with people who struggle at school for that reason, because it came so easy. It's like a super athlete saying, why can't you throw the ball 40 yards? Mm-hmm. Well, my body's not made like that. The same thing goes for the brain, but and I thought the education of him was interesting. They certainly gave him access to a lot of great books and all that stuff, and it served him well. But I mean, that type of educational system is not going to work for everybody. Now, having said all that, I absolutely agree that our present educational system could do with a lot more reform and a lot more higher expectations of everybody across the board, and we're letting people just coast. Mm-hmm. Yeah, including from the top to the bottom. Yeah. And they're really just not doing. And I think they even alluded to in this chapter somewhere, it's in my notes somewhere, they didn't believe in public education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's at the very end.
That it should be basically privately financed, but then there should be some sort of maybe governmental influence or some sort of assistance with resources and that type of thing. But of course, that was before public education as we understand it. Mm-hmm. And I really do think we need to get back to, the school choice thing is probably the mechanism which it goes there, which is essentially privatizing all education, mm-hmm. from preschool all the way through university level. No government involvement except for funding of the individual. Mm-hmm. So
that's exactly his thoughts at the end of the chapters. Right. The only government assistance is directly to the families who need it for tuition. Right.
And I think that's where you got to get the reform. And I haven't been a great advocate of that, because it relies upon the parents to make the right decisions and to pull a kid out of one school and the other school. And a lot of parents aren't responsible, but if those parents aren't responsible under our current system, the kids are failing anyway. Yeah. So we might as well give the resources to the ones that value education. And, there's so many stories through American history of illiterate parents that valued education. Their kids went on to be doctors and astronauts and all that. I mean, it's crazy how successful people can be when their parents started out with nothing, couldn't even read a book. Yeah. Just if you have the resources and you're willing to really have your kids excel.
Very true.
But anyway, so I agree with them when they're saying that the decentralized role of education is really, really important.
Yes. Yeah. But back to Mill's life. He was sent to France at 14 to stay with Bentham's brother, and he learned fluent French and fell in love with the livelier culture of France. And he was soon tasked with the appallingly hard work of completing one of Bentham's projects, assembling the notes, editing the manuscript, and reducing it to a publishable form. So that was very, very much taxing on him. He then suffered a life-changing experience. He realized that the projects that he was tasked with were not making him happy, and he fell into a depressed state that possibly lasted 2 years. He was brought out of this state by reading the memoirs of Marmontel, and he burst into tears upon the description of the death of Marmontel's father. He had been terrified that he was incapable of human emotion, and this sort of emotional outburst was proof that he was still a sentient creature. He realized that education must attend to the cultivation of emotion and of intellect, and also realized the importance of the moral and political values that are hard to make sense of in utilitarian terms, those being autonomy, vitality, the desire to be the author of one's own existence, and human dignity. So there are some things that don't just fit this scheme of what makes the most people happy.
Right, and then that's the real strength of his argument, but it's also the most inherent weakness of it. You can't quantify it.
Yeah.
And how do you determine what? And if you can't quantify it, what's the point of it? Because you're saying, well, we're trying to figure out the utilitarian argument. What's going to make the best people, most people, the most happy, or some sort of, however you want to phrase it. But how do you calculate that when you're also putting in those kind of uncertain or ill-defined values like art, beauty? I mean, how do you and even like a play about someone who suffers, it's a sad play, or like a movie that has a really terrible ending, but it moves you because it's powerful, but it doesn't make you happy, but it makes you think. I mean, that's the fundamental problem with utilitarianism is you can't do it.
Yeah,
I think that was a math equation. And he's trying to figure out. He's very smart in how he's trying to do it. But go ahead.
I think that was Mill's realizations that he was part of that problem, because he's well, this project will make many more people happy. At least in his understanding. But it's not making him happy at all. He feels like a machine,
right?
And so that's part of like the unquantifiable things, is like how fulfilling something is. Of course, that leads to happiness in some capacity, but it's so unquantifiable. What is inherently fulfilling for some people, and of course, just editing down a massive manuscript by some old man is not exactly the most fulfilling thing to do.
I was just thinking, I need an assistant.
Oh no!
I need the assistant to like transcribe all my thoughts. I don't want to do the work of actually typing or writing anything. I want to just be able to spot off for hours on end on a weekend.
Well, there's this magical thing on most computers called speech to text. And you just click the little button, and it takes down everything that you say as
I should
text.
do that.
I think that would be pretty easy for you.
Yeah, just have to get in a mood for a rant.
Yes.
And just pick up the microphone and go to town.
That's great.
I just have to edit it a little bit for grammar and all that.
Very true.
But what it really was, it was a religious. Is a questioning of his religion, because really utilitarianism is just a different type of religion, and so he had a real crisis of confidence with regard to his faith. His faith it's all regimented, but then it dawns on him, none of this is making me happy, even though it's the most important of my life's work to this point. And he goes into a deep depression from lasting months, if not up to 2 years, until he finally realized, well, I'm not a robot, because I cried at this passage of somebody else's. It kind of reminds me of Sheldon from the Big Bang Theory?
Yeah.
He has an epiphany of, things that somebody not as bright as him, being John Stuart Mill, would have realized years and years before.
True.
That part of it.
Yes. Moving back to more of Mill's life,
yes.
It was dramatically changed again by falling in love with Harriet Taylor. This was an interesting relationship because she was married, had a husband, but her husband allowed for this relationship to continue, but kept up the marriage to his wife for the sake of his children. And so Mill withdrew from social life and spent much of his time with Harriet kind of in secret. Then in 1843, he published a system of logic which aimed to show that all human knowledge began in experience. We don't have or need an intuition to perceive the truth of mathematical, ethical, or physical laws. He believed the doctrine of intuitive capacities was a support of conservative doctrines, and a better philosophy is needed. And so he had two important aims for setting up a better philosophy. He stated that the social sciences should eventually provide results as reliable as the physical sciences. Knowledge of the social world should be a rational scientific basis. He also believed that political practice must rest on a historically sensitive political sociology. He coined the term ethology, the science of how the success or failure of political institutions depended on the characters of the population. He insisted that the modern state could practice representative government, and that's a thing that we'll get into later as well. But with those two things, understanding the social aspect of things very scientifically, and then resting all of political practice on this understanding of the social side of things. He then published the Principles of Political Economy in 1848. He believed that the current economists were too sure that only Victorian capitalism was a possible economic system and believed a form of socialism was possible, but it is up to the future working people to decide how it works. So very much like Marx saying, something's better and we'll eventually get to that system, but that's something that'll just happen in future generations. But in 1851, Harriet Taylor's husband died and she married Mill, but they soon discovered that they both had tuberculosis, and Harriet died in 1858, and Mill's work on liberty was her memorial. I'm going to read here. He says, On Liberty was her memorial, became one of the most important manifestos of social and political liberalism, and remains one of the liveliest and freshest of Mill's works. Its arguments are no more believed than when it was first published, but its capacity to spark enthusiasm and outrage has hardly diminished. It received an unwitting tribute from the Tsarist censors in 1867, when they allowed the publication of a Russian translation of Karl Marx's Das Kapital and refused permission for a translation of On Liberty. Nobody would make head or tail of Das Kapital, but anyone reading Mill would draw unfortunate conclusions about the conservative and despotic near-theocracy over which Alexander III then ruled. So
Of course, it's conservative.
Yes.
Because it's despotic.
Of course.
But I guess, harkening back to last episode where I went on a rant, I think it was the last one about how
fascism
is always thought of as conservative. I want to make an amendment to what I was saying, and that there is some overlap because, especially if you talk about Franco in Spain, fascist government, but it was also conservative because it wanted to conserve the Catholic Church and certain traditions. And so it can be both. But, it was really in response to the communists murdering a bunch of nuns and priests and burning churches. Mm-hmm. So, the overlap should be expected because it's more of self-defense. But I do want to mention, like on this, they're talking about how he believed some sort of socialism, a form of socialism can go to be in Britain, which I guess from his calculations, it's kind of odd that you hear somebody talking about liberty so much and personal autonomy, but you're talking about socialism. Mm-hmm. But it's before socialism really was ever tried and implemented. And he's talking about worker-owned cooperatives and to give people more autonomy over their own workplace. Yes. But of course, he's missing the point that if you have more people in ownership, you are really diluting the accountability and the responsibility for the company. I mean, that's really the heart of the problem. If I have a client that has 3 people running a business, unless they work very well together, it can cause immediate problems, and the whole business can collapse because you have too many bosses. There are too many. Well, too many chiefs and not enough Indians. Have you ever heard that phrase? I've never heard that one. You've never heard the too many chiefs, not enough Indians? No. Yeah. So if you have an organization, and like the triumvirate of communists at your school. Yes. Well, they have too many chiefs and not enough Indians. They don't have any regular people to do the work of a club. They would just be members of the club. Everybody has to be chief. Well, you have all these chiefs. Who's the Indians? You've never heard that?
I've never heard that.
Oh, that's a great saying.
That's great.
Yeah.
But back to Mill, he continued to write for many years on the topics of women's suffrage, worker-owned cooperatives, and a religion of humanity. And then between 1865 and 1868, he was Liberal MP for the city of Westminster and took active part in women's suffrage and land reform, but then died in 1873 in Avignon, France.
You forgot to mention that he was trying to figure out how to do a religion of humanity.
Yes.
Which is why I think that his depression was caused by a questioning of his religion.
Probably.
Because he has this... You have these people that are really, really smart, and they get caught up with believing that you can have a religion of intellect, and it really is just self-worship and worship of humans as if we are divine, and it always goes wrong. It never works out.
Of course. But then moving on to a lot of what John Stuart Mill really believed, first in rethinking utilitarianism. And John Stuart Mill believed that there was an absence of systematic thinking. He believed that Britain lacked a clerisy, which was a series of public intellectuals whose views in society and culture would exercise authority throughout society. The clerisy needed a utilitarian creed. And then he defines utilitarianism.
We used to have like a thought class in the United States that we were deferred to. There's nothing like that now. Nobody follows anybody now. Yeah. Nobody respects anybody in authority.
You think so?
Name one institution that you think, I can take what they say to the bank.
I mean, I think a lot of people do that without like that sort of approach.
I'm asking
behind
you.
Me, no.
Right.
But I think there is a large percentage of people that are like, okay, well, CNN said this, or okay, Fox News said this, and I think they're just like, okay.
I don't know.
You don't think so?
No.
I think that is true.
No, I think they're mostly saying CNN agrees with me, so I'm right.
I mean, isn't that your whole point about COVID? Is that everybody just did what everybody higher than them said?
That's not my only point.
Yeah.
But I think it was so universal. The problem was universality of it. And I don't want to get on a COVID branch again, but
but I mean, I think that's a good example. Is
because it was universal. You had Fox News, you had CNN, you had every governmental authority from the top down, bottom up, and side to side saying we had to do these things. Mm-hmm. And if you dissented from that, they would shut you down. So it's not as if you're just hearing it from CNN and so you're to believe it. It was everywhere. So John Stuart Mill would agree with me on this. You have to have a diverse access to information because that was my argument, because you didn't have to trust just one. It wasn't like I have faith in this institution. It was our church, for crying out loud. The Catholic Church, the Pope was talking about how you have to shut down mass for COVID.
Yeah.
Everybody except for there's a small minority of people who are like, I don't think that's necessary. And they shut them down. Yeah. In Canada, they were locking them up, for crying out loud. They're debanking people.
But you really don't think that there's a large percentage of people that just puts their faith in whatever, X media organization or X politician says? Because I think there is.
Large percent. I think there's a minority, a distinct minority. But I really don't. I think, of course, I don't know that I agree with all polling, but I think if you poll, you look at the polling data over the years, you can see faith in government going down. Yeah. The Congress is in the toilet. I mean, it's less than 20%, but of course we re-elect our individual congressman. But the Senate, the same thing. President, press, universities, they're all down. The Supreme Court was the leader for a while at just a little over 50%, or it might have been over 60%. Now it's maybe over a little over 50% because now the liberals hate the Supreme Court too. Because they took back what they gave them. No, you know what they were really calling the Supreme Court? Indian givers. That's what they were calling them. Don't you know that term?
No.
You've never heard the term Indian givers?
No, I've never heard that.
It's a disparaging term to Native Americans.
Oh.
Yeah, you've never heard that?
No.
Wow, that slur, I guess, is gone into the ether. So when somebody promises something or give you something, but they don't give it to you, or they give it to you and they take it back, they're an Indian giver because they're not true to their word. They'll take back what they promised to give you.
Yes.
And so the Supreme Court, gave them the constitutional right to abortion, and then they took it back. So they're Indian givers.
Yes.
I don't really mean that Indians are Indian givers.
Yes.
That was a pejorative, and it was just a saying.
Yes.
I'm shocked you've never heard that.
I've never heard that in my life.
Interesting.
But yes, back to John Stuart Mill and his clerisy founded on utilitarianism, and what he defined utilitarianism as is whatever matters because of its effect on human well-being, and human well-being is constituted by happiness. It was secular and universalist and explains all forms of good and bad, not just moral good and evil. With this came a definition of morality as well, which is a system of rules of conduct that we collectively impose on ourselves and enforce with psychological sanctions. He says a true critical morality is the rules that would maximize human well-being if we all followed them. So he says, morality is essentially just a social construct. It's just what we've decided, best benefits our culture, and we impose restrictions on ourselves.
And it's a pretty clever definition, but it's really easier said than done, and it's even easier said than done than it is to write it down.
Yeah. How
do you write down what are the rules that would maximize human well-being if we've all followed those rules? That's a social construct. How do you even determine what that is? And how do we even know what this really is culture? What we call culture, like the American culture, or if you have I call it the criminal subculture of trailer parks, of some of them. I mean, some are very nice, but if you have a certain area of high crime. In Jefferson County, it would be like a trailer park area or something, and there's a culture of criminality there where you won't cooperate with police. You if something's left out, you steal it, and so there's a certain social morals there that people have in that culture, that's really what he's talking about, is one of those rules that we accept as a society, that there's, because his system would work, like have you heard the phrase, snitches get stitches?
I've heard that one.
So that is a form of his morality, because the view is, if you snitch, then the bad coming from that, which would be a person who commits crime is prosecuted and goes to jail, outweighs the benefit to the rest of us that nobody's going to go to jail, right? Because if nobody snitches, it's just whatever we want to do, and we set our own rules. We won't let the government come in and tell us, somebody's going to get punished for something. So that's a form of morality under his definition. And it works within that subculture, because if nobody snitches, well, then nobody will get stitches.
Yes.
And then nobody will go to jail. Nobody gets arrested. And maybe you settle it among yourselves, with retaliatory murders. But that's not ideal. But it is, I think it fits that definition.
I think so too.
Because there's no foundation to this system. There's no, it's like a floating island. And it's like a raft as opposed to an island. It's like it doesn't have anything that grounds it, unmoving to something that doesn't change over time. And that's why I don't think it's a real morality, and I don't think it's a real religion.
Interesting.
I think
that's a good point. But he says the reason
and
that
do you like how I made that philosophical argument with the snitches get stitches?
Yes, that's good. That's very good. Very clever.
I thought it was pretty good. I just came up with that off the top of my head right now.
Oh, that's good. You'll have to write that one down. He says the reason
that's a chapter in my next book.
Snitches get stitches?
Yes, or why John Stuart Mill is wrong.
Your next book, that implies that you've written one
well,
already.
I have Mark Bishop's Book of Knowledge. You know that.
God.
Which I don't think we've ever mentioned in this podcast.
Oh, no, we definitely have.
Early on, season
very
1.
Early on, yes.
If anybody's with us this long.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
But he says
I'm not.
He says that the reason that we have morality is because that we need many forbearances from each other and some positive help. We need other people to not attack us or rob us or kill us, but we also owe positive duties to other people. He then sets up 3 different dimensions of behaving well or wrongly. He says the first is that we behave imprudently, and that's we just damage our own interests. The example he gives is, just drinking too much, essentially.
Or snitching.
Well...
I'm telling you, it works.
Yes, but that would be an immoral thing, because that damages the interests of others as well. So that's his example of drinking and then driving because you might hit somebody.
Yeah, it's a twofer.
And then the third dimension is an assessment of behavior along the spectrum of noble to base, not just good or evil.
It's noble for you not to snitch
Yes.
in that culture.
Yes, very
true. It fits
true.
it. So that's why... Anyway, I'll digress. Go ahead. But you see what my point is.
Yes, okay, no,
right.
I do exactly. He then goes on to say that he wanted to show utilitarianism could supply the premises for all aspects of human life, including the self-regarding side of life. He says here, utilitarianism could be extended from the business side of life to all others. There's nothing incoherent in holding that these self-regarding sentiments and values are the most important of all values, and that they were not to be promoted by coercive, organized action. It is the essence of liberalism. So essentially, it's very much grounded in the person, what they believe to be right, founded on this idea of morality, which is kind of this collective thing based on the culture. So like you're saying, little foundation there, very much shifting in the times.
And I think it works on a level of description of something that already exists. But it is not a prescription for how you determine how to act appropriately in the future and how to set up a moral framework, if that makes sense. Because there's, like I said, there's no foundation. But it's almost like a social science, a political science description of what society believes as he defines it. So the moral structure, I think he's describing political culture, and this is what the morals are of that culture. So if we go to like some cannibal tribe that had no contact with us, and we go to study them, this would be a good way to study their morality, because you would see what they value and how it benefits the group more than themselves, and what's noble about them. Maybe not eating someone's skull and giving it to someone less strong would be seen as noble. Now we would still see them as cold-blooded killers and cannibals, which is a negative thing in our society. But so I think I think he has a system that is descriptive, but not prescriptive, or does not create a moral system. It just describes what our culture values.
Yes, true. I agree.
Thank you.
He then goes on to say that he believed that the current age of the individual was an age of mass opinion and mass action. I kind of like what he says here. He says on page 710, the individuals of whom society was composed acted as a mass. Tocqueville reinforced Mill's doubts. He described America as a country in which there was less real freedom of thought than anywhere else in the world. Yet it had a Bill of Rights, elaborate legal arrangements to secure individual freedom, and a collective enthusiasm for exploration and taming the frontier. According to Tocqueville, it had neither a taste nor a talent for encouraging individuals to think for themselves. And he gets more into this idea of mass opinion later, but that's a good thing to keep in mind. Then his work, Utilitarianism, clarified what utility actually is. He defines it as what is useful in the ordinary sense, along with good, right, just, and beautiful, explained in terms of the promotion of happiness. So it's not just, what is most useful as we ordinarily think about it, but also, what is, what good action, what right action, what just action leads to the most happiness. And utility provides guidance whether or not there is a God, and this is where we get into his secular ideas. He says, if there is a God, then God will want us to follow utility. If not, we should follow it anyway.
Right. This is the same argument for religion, too. A religion without God, if God doesn't exist, if your religion makes sense for society, then what does it matter if God exists?
True.
And so it, like, again, it's descriptive, but so his system, his utilitarianism is agnostic, as it doesn't depend on God. Well, the utilitarian nature of a religion doesn't depend on the existence of God either.
It's interesting.
No, made you think.
Did make me think. He then goes on to say that that utilitarianism endorsed what nobody could reject and allowed us to revise debatable rules. So he kind of says, the positive morality of a society will already embody what utilitarianism would endorse, but it also provides a critical morality against which any society's morality can be tested.
Yeah, I think this is what wasn't it Breitbart who said religion is downstream of culture, or politics is. He said politics is downstream of culture, and that's why he wanted to form a media empire and all that kind of stuff. And he died at a relatively young age. He's younger than I am now. And so that's why Breitbart News, it was created by Breitbart and all that. And so he wanted to have a media, and that's really what the Daily News is trying to do. And so you're talking about changing morals, your culture and your utilitarian religion, which we have without calling it that in America, is really pushing our society and our politics to a certain degree to change our moral values, to just licentiousness, to having no rules.
But then Alan Ryan does acknowledge the criticisms against utilitarianism. He says them in brief. He says the idea that humans should take pleasure as the cornerstone of ethics is animalistic. That was one of the first big ones. Where you, I think he calls it the pig philosophy. Right. Yeah. And then the second big criticism is that Mill distinguished between different qualities of pleasure. So he seems to almost undermine himself, which overthrows the idea of order and calculation. If we have different levels of pleasure, then, is it really objective, as you say?
Because when you get out of the realm of quantity and you're getting quality in there, how do you make a determination of the value of the quality of this happiness? Yeah. Without just getting into completely subjective measuring, and you really can't.
And Alan Ryan,
once you acknowledge that beauty, however you want to define it, like an architecture, art, or just a beautiful soul, personality. Once you acknowledge that is important for human development, human happiness, and for your soul, or if you don't believe in the soul, your mind, this whole utilitarianism just fails because there's no way to quantify it.
Yeah. Well, Alan Ryan's example is, just a couch potato, someone who sits around all day. If he is truly happy, if we're living in a utilitarian society, what is to stop us from promoting that? That is leading to his most happiness right now. So why shouldn't anybody just be a couch potato?
And I have this writing on my margin. This is really the debate, the internal debate that one of the characters in The Matrix had. Oh. So you remember the movie, the original Matrix?
Yes, the original Matrix.
And so Neo is revealed to him that he's really just in a pod, and it's all electronic matrix. Well, there's one of the characters in that submarine. I forget the name of the character, but he made a deal with the bad guys where they were going to wipe his memory clean and let him go back in the pod, and he would be like a wealthy character in the Matrix. And so he killed one of the guys. Remember that?
Yeah, I remember. I know what you're
And so then the question is, which he raises, in the book, he talks about, would you rather be a really lazy, stupid person or a fool or Socrates, unhappy Socrates or a happy fool? Well, he says, he would assert we'd all rather be an unhappy Socrates rather than a happy fool. Well, I don't know that that's true. Yeah. That guy in the Matrix would rather have been a happy fool, ignorant of what the world is and living in a pod, because his consciousness wouldn't be aware of even his own reality.
Yeah.
And so I think that criticism of him is really telling. The same kind of thing, that sliding scale of quality of values and happiness just undercuts his entire theory. And so that's why he doesn't have a foundation. That's why he's floating on a raft above any sort of firm values other than autonomy. I mean, that's really what he comes down to, is that his foundation is built on valuing personal autonomy.
Yeah.
Well, if that's all you value, or if that's a foundation, why would any restrictions on that be acceptable or appropriate?
Yep.
And that's where you get the libertarian argument, which is you can only limit people's autonomy in the sense that their actions would harm another individual. And so it's a negative calculation where you can do whatever you want as long as you don't harm anybody else. And so, you can smoke whatever you want to do, you do whatever drugs, you can do whatever you want with consenting adults, but as long as you don't specifically harm somebody else. But of course, it doesn't take into account the destruction of your society as a whole. Yeah. There's no aggregate, there's no feeling about the value of the community.
Yeah, all progress would stop.
Not all progress. We would have a lot more hookers, a lot more cocaine. And so it'd be a Hunter Biden world. I mean, really, because he could do whatever he wanted. He had almost unlimited funds with no moral compass or restrictions on his what he wants to do. I'm not saying everybody would do that, but you wouldn't have no progress, but it would not be a functioning society we certainly would not be a utopia.
Yeah.
Sorry, I went on that little rant there.
Oh, that was a good rant. We then turn to justice, and he says there is a big problem with justice in a utilitarian system.
I forgot one other point.
Okay, what's your other point?
It also doesn't value delayed gratification. How do you figure out how to delay gratification as a value? So sometimes when you work really hard on a job or something and you really struggle for it over a long period of time to get that, to delay your gratification now for something in the future, how do you quantify that in his moral system? You just can't.
True.
Anyway, go ahead. Justice.
Yes, justice. He says the problem with justice is that it seems to be concerned with individuals, the distribution of goods and bads, and strict obligation, while utility is concerned with maximizing happiness over a range of individuals with less strict obligations. Now, Mill, of course, thought justice was utilitarian, but with a security label that we enforce more fiercely. He says we cannot do without our neighbor's respect for our security, and that's where justice comes in. Security is still very important in his utilitarian society. It's not just do whatever makes you happy. It's sort of that idea you just described, just don't hurt other people, and then you can do whatever you want. But he says the part of morality that Mill calls the realm of justice is the most important, most basic part. There it matters more than anywhere else that every individual should be able to call upon society for aid and assistance against attacks of all sorts. Justice is thus, as it should be, the most political of the virtues. And so justice, in this utilitarian way, is sort of the foundation of a lot of politics for Mill.
Well, and I want to mention I'm going to say this quote from the book. He's talking about really self-policing. That like you have to have this culture that I kind of alluded to earlier. He meant, this is the quote: the absence of such self-policing characterizes societies with high levels of violence and low levels of economic success. The communitarian movement of the United States has been emphasizing this point for some years, and that is 100% true. You have to have a culture of safety and security and respect for others, or you will not have a safe society. And there's nothing law enforcement or the military or outside forces can do to alleviate that situation. You have to have a culture that self-polices Because when you have a breakdown of that, and we're seeing that in communities all across this country, where you have a complete breakdown of that self-policing aspect of it, where you, even if you're not convicted of something, you be shunned from your family. It works currently for pedophiles. Like that's like one of the last few groups that you can absolutely shun. And if your brother is found out to be a pedophile, nobody would criticize you for disowning that person. Not that any of your brothers were,
even that is slipping slightly.
Well, true, because they're trying to normalize it.
It's the last, minor attracted persons.
Yeah, it's the last outpost of society being able to just judge you, to shame you. And now, granted, they have, there's a lot of segments of society would shame people for being Republicans or whatever. So there's always, that side of it too. But when you talk about the more traditional crimes, but anyway, back to my original point, which is in this book, which is you have to have some sort of self-policing in your culture, in your society, or else you don't have that as part of your society. If you don't have the self-policing, there's no government can deal with it. They can crush you and keep you locked up. That's it. And that's really where we are. Yeah. It's like, what is our solution to high crime areas in certain segments of the state of Missouri? Well, the only solution that anybody, well, now they're just trying to throw money at it. I don't know, or like community services, but that doesn't solve the underlying problem, which is the cultural problem. Why is it okay to have your 13-year-old hanging out at 2 in the morning? If you have a culture that says that's okay, there's nothing anybody can do about it.
Very true. We then turn to On Liberty. And by the early 1850s, Mill had become convinced that Britain suffered from a stifling conformism. He thought that democracy could mean tyranny of the majority. That was a big issue. He thought that ordinary people had acquired countervailing power against their former oppressors, but this led to a new, gentler, but harder to resist oppression. He feared mass democracy, and that the dead weight of public opinion would bear down on every member of society, and we adopt as our own the attitudes and outlook of society at large, stopping us from thinking for ourselves. And this particularly targeted the middle class. He says he wanted to stop the dead hand of respectability from inhibiting what we are willing to think, feel, and do. Mill's primary target is therefore a social attitude rather than political oppression, but his fears about social oppression imply obvious anxieties about the political consequences of such social attitudes. Like Tocqueville, Mill feared quiet despotism. Dissenters would be unemployable, frozen out of clubs, universities, political parties. They would not be jailed or sent to concentration camps. A society where the vast majority was of one mind had no need of sharper weapons.
And we're seeing that now, aren't we?
I think that's exactly
he's talking about that, the ostracizing of dissenting voices that we're living with now. But the earlier point that you mentioned and then went on to this one was where they talk about the novel kind of oppression where all of us collectively oppress each of us individually. So like if we kind of allow ourselves to be lulled into this oppression of all of us as individuals, and you see that with this collective action, again, the COVID thing where we're all allowing, well, it's just doing this little thing to help everybody. We just kind of all go along to get along, and before you know it, we're going to have barcodes on our arms. And that's, that used to be like crazy talk.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was younger, when they first started, I lived long enough that I lived before barcodes. And, or at least before they were commonly used in stores. They had stickers, for crying out loud, the sticker prices. And that's part of what you call a sticker price.
Yes.
But in cars, it was stuck the way they still stick them in the windows. But anyway, but you'd say, well, they're going to put barcodes on us and put us in a database. So that was a fight against the Social Security number.
Yeah.
Originally, they don't want to have a governmental database that identified us by number. God, they exist in public databases and private databases, and they know everything about us. But we're oppressing ourselves collectively. So he had a lot of foresight in this topic, and he's right about the quiet despotism where well, like who was it that said the fascism will come to America with a smile? Who said that?
It might have been Reagan. Or I know Reagan has one quote about it coming under the guise of liberalism.
Yes,
but I don't know about the one.
I think he was quoting somebody else.
Maybe.
But anyway, yes.
Yeah, but I agree. It's interesting because it's like it seems backwards to like how we should think of oppression, because like the kind of oppression that I think we have now is sort of this idea we only oppress people who oppress other people, if that makes sense. Because like you were saying earlier, because we don't have as many standards about what is right and what is wrong. It's everybody is allowed to do whatever they want, and if you say they shouldn't be allowed to do whatever they want, you're kicked out. And that's the only occasion when we have actual like ostracism and stuff like that is what I really think is that's kind of what you're getting at. Well, we only ostracize Republicans or Democrats if we don't agree with them, and that sort of idea. Getting away from sort of just like the actual crimes, but I feel like that's kind of where it's coming from now, is this idea of if you're not in favor of everybody doing whatever they want, you are the type of person that we can not allow to do whatever they want. Correct. If that makes sense.
That's right. Well, you're a blasphemer.
Yes.
I mean, it's a type of religion, and you're a blasphemer, so you must be excised from society or kicked out. And it's goofy, but that's what he's talking about here. This kind of soft despotism, or it's just by consensus. It's not even by government action. Yeah. And with the amount of power that corporations have now over your bank, over your job, over your ability to communicate. I mean, you can always still write a letter. Yeah. But good luck with social media if you say stop the steal.
Well, it also doesn't help that a lot of the political side of things is of the same mind too. Correct. So it's like even if you wanted to appeal to what should be an impartial judge in these sorts of things, there is none.
Well, that was one of the calculations of that I had initially way back when is how, and I had people contact me to hire me to start challenging some of these governmental mandates. I had some other issues, conflict issues and that kind of stuff at the time too. But the problem was that the Missouri Supreme Court issued draconian restrictions on in-person attendance in courtrooms and mask wearing and all that kind of stuff. So if we were going to litigate this, and of course there was absolutely no legal authority for that sort of thing. They would say, well, they do because they're in control of their courtrooms. Well, to a point, but they're still public courtrooms. Anyway, let me get back to the point, is what's the point? Even if I could win at the trial level, it would be appealed to Court of Appeals and then ultimately the Missouri Supreme Court. Well, they've already decided these are okay because they did them. Yeah. So I'd have to convince them, and it was a unanimous court, that all of them were wrong. Yes. And so you kind of see that consensus with everything, and so they can ostracize you by consent, and then you just kind of go along with it. And then where are you later when you really need to object? Well, you've consented to it. You've helped create it.
Turning back to Mill.
Depressing.
That is depressing. He says here that Mill came to realize that human nature was multifaceted and even contradictory. So happiness is too vague a label, so kind of coming away from his earlier ideas. And so this is where he kind of then changes happiness into an idea of autonomous self-fulfillment as the true goal of modern humanity. He says we seek to live life from the inside as opposed to taking standards from others, which I think is a better and more complex definition, but I still think that any utilitarian model, I think, just struggles in any regard to actually enforce what it says it's believing in. Right. But then he goes on to say that society may coerce members only in self-defense. So society can encourage, exhort, and complain and cajole, but only in preventing harm may society coerce, and coercion involves psychological or physical harm intended to deter us from thoughts or actions at issue. And so this leads him into his ideas on the forms of punishment. He says the kind of harm that society may protect others against is also circumscribed, but Mill circumscribes it by telling the reader what it is not. It does not harm us to hear our favorite ideas contradicted. It does not harm us to hear our religious beliefs denounced as nonsense. It does not harm us to know that other persons believe our allegiances are a tissue of superstition. This is the principle of anti-moralism. We cannot invoke the claim that a piece of behavior is immoral in deciding whether it harms people.
And he's got a lot of great quotes. If you look up his actual writings, John Stuart Mill has a lot of great free speech stuff. He is 100% great on free speech issues and freedom of thought and freedom of expression. And this is what he's really talking about there. Yeah, is that there's it described, that you don't have a moral right to tell people to shut up because you hurt their feelings.
Well, I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying too, is that this idea of all of these things are wrong because they are immoral, they are harmful. Not just wrong because they're immoral. They're immoral in my perception, and therefore they are harmful to people.
Right.
By saying these things, you are a danger to society at large.
Correct.
And that is cause for ostracization or punishment or what have you.
And it really is just a religious belief. You know, that you're harming my religious beliefs, my belief in soul, what is right and wrong, and it's just an unacknowledged religion. And that's what makes it so hard to talk to these people.
Well, it's interesting because I agree so much with John Stuart Mill here, but I feel like his theories, like this utilitarian approach, would inherently lead to these problems that he's arguing against.
Well, and I think he acknowledges it. That's why he's talking about them, because he acknowledges that's the weakness in his argument. He's trying to address them. And he's doing a pretty decent job. I just don't think there's any way to get there.
Yeah.
You know?
Because if you're saying, you know, all of you know, society is founded on either happiness or this autonomous self-fulfillment, and we have to maximize that.
Correct.
It's so based on the individual.
Yes.
And if the individual is so convinced that whatever they're doing is right, then that has to apply to everybody else in that person's perspective. And then if you have this issue of the mass conformity, then that just leads to everybody who agrees on the same thing, therefore can just punish everybody else by excluding them from everything.
Right.
So,
and I think it only works within a framework where you have a religion that believes in individual autonomy and morality and worth, and has a constitutional framework like the United States has a Bill of Rights where the government is going to be limited from taking specific actions, and otherwise you're going to have the tyranny of the majority under the guise of we're doing what's best for everybody, including you.
Yes.
Or else.
He goes on to say that this implies absolute freedom of thought and near absolute freedom of speech. Mill places some restrictions only on incitement and fraud. We can't incite people to violence. We can't just, blatantly, lie about things in an official setting. And he says there's more to life than not doing what we must not do. So this idea of, we're not just supposed to exist, according to, the basic restrictions on our activity. But he says political institutions shelter our individual pursuit of our ultimate ends, but cannot do more than provide us with resources. Then goes on to say that education is very important. This is kind of what we were talking about earlier.
That's right, yeah.
He says parents must see that their children are educated, or else this violates society's right to not have dumped upon it persons who cannot support themselves, and also the child's right to not be thrown into the world unable to cope. And I think this is a problem I think that we've seen as well, kind of what you were mentioning earlier with schools just kind of churning out people who have, high school diplomas or whatever, because, that's kind of what's necessary in a lot of regards to succeed in places. And so this idea of kind of, favoring just that one specific student over the rest of, society's right to not have that one particular student who is by rights failing all of his classes just dumped upon them.
Right.
Which I feel like is something that is missing. He also says that the state should not dictate school curricula or run schools beyond a small number of exemplary institutions. However, Mill occasionally states that an intelligent government will have a better idea of the public's needs than the public. So sort of going back and forth there, which is not good. Do not agree with Mill there.
Yeah, the only thing I think he's consistently good at is the freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and be able to express yourself, because he's just so adamant about it. For obvious reasons, he had some controversial views, and so I think he felt that. But yeah, his ideas of he had a lot of faith in an educated class as being leaders in the government and in setting policy. And of course, we have a different educated class now that are a bunch of fools, and I think our university system is so broke that it's this credentializing, that's what you're talking about. Everybody has to have a credential. And then also the government licensing of professions has just got completely out of control. And so because when you have these licenses, they always want to have a basis for revoking them. So like if you're a barber and you get busted for a bank robbery, why can't you be a barber still? But you get your license revoked. For what? I mean, you can't be a barber? I mean, I'm not saying that happens all the time, but I mean, all these, when you have to have a license to do all sorts of things that you wouldn't think you'd need to have a license for. Like in some states, you have like 3 different licenses there's like certain kind of braiding for like African Americans hair, and they have a special license for it in some states. Yeah, it really is just a way to focus, to narrow the market so they can have inflated prices. Yeah, but it's anti-competition.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We then move on to Mill's ideas on representative government. He says that Mill moved away from his youthful belief that majoritarian democracy would secure good and incorrupt government, and what is rather needed is an antagonism of opinions. This idea that if that the majority does rule, but not unchallenged, you always have voices dissenting against just the majority. He says that we need to secure a progressive government, which is this idea of indefinite intellectual, industrial, and moral progress, never ending.
Right.
He says what form of government could, make best use of available resources and faster advance to higher stages of society is best. Whatever's just good for the current time. And he says despotism is justified if it is the best way to advance. And he kind of excuses slavery as well there. It allowed the Greeks to advance and things like that, which would make sense because his philosophy would say that the morality of it worked at the time.
Yeah. Because that was their cultural values, and more people benefited than our history benefited because they were able to lay about and think about political philosophy while their slaves did all the work. I mean, that's a common argument, and again, that's because he doesn't have a moral foundation that just says some things are right and some things are wrong. Period. Because it just floats along depending on what everybody kind of wants to do at the time. And it's situational ethics writ large. Yeah. It's how does society value things?
Then goes on to say that in modern society, the only tolerable government is one accountable to the governed. And he says, therefore, representative government allows citizens to govern themselves so as to bring out the ideals and ambitions and energies of a people. He says, direct democracy is not possible at all, and a great deal of administration is still necessary in modern government. But the essence of modern government is accountability, and that is what we need most of all. He also had put forward 3 unorthodox views at the time regarding the right to vote.
Sure.
The first was suffrage being extended to women. He says Mill did not argue in favor of female suffrage. He simply treated the suggestion that women should not have the vote as on par with suggesting that red-headed men should not have the vote, transparently irrational, which I think is pretty good line of thinking there.
That's right.
Hey guys, this is just stupid. Let's not, restrict women.
Insisting on others to defend it rather than have to argue against it.
Yes.
It's a very good tactic, too.
His second unorthodox view is a little stranger. He favored the idea of an increased votes with increased education. The ballot box should encourage intelligent opinions rather than just self-interest, and we should award intelligence by awarding extra votes to those with better education.
Yeah, this is similar to what they had, the Jim Crow laws, where you had to take a test, and of course they didn't teach them how to read and write, and so they said, well, you can't read and write, so you can't vote. But some of it makes sense if you didn't have that kind of discriminatory practices. I don't think the education works anymore because who knows what a degree is even worth anymore. But possibly a test.
Yeah.
Like if you can't name the 3 branches of government, if you can't name, they have like a list of 10 things. Those man on the street interviews where they don't know anything. And was Abraham Lincoln a Republican or Democrat? Every one of them will say Democrat. I'm not saying those particular questions, but maybe you should get 2 votes if you could answer 10 out of 10 on some basic civics.
I feel like it's
or maybe you get half a vote if you can't.
Describe, the people who are on the ballot, describe what each position actually does.
Well, that'd be tough for like 90% of the
people.
Is true. That would be a great way to limit the vote. But of course, once you have a test, then you have people have to design the test, and the people that design the test are always going to design it so they and their supporters will be able to vote, and everybody else wouldn't. So the devil literally will be in the details of that. But it makes sense intellectually to say that the people that actually know something should vote, and the people that don't shouldn't. But I think in America especially, you get a lot of that.
Yeah.
Where and that's why I hate these efforts to do the mail-in voting and to like my theory is I don't want anybody other than me to vote.
Yeah.
I don't encourage anyone to vote. If anybody says, I don't know if I want to go to the polling place, like it's the middle of the day, I don't know, maybe I just go home, or I'm not going to go to dinner or something. I always tell them, go to dinner, don't vote. And they're like, what? I said, why would I want you to vote? You're just going to dilute my vote. There's a good chance that on one of these issues, you're going to vote a different way than me. So why would I want that? I want to be the only one voting. And so and it used to be before they've really pushed out this ballot harvesting where they go out and they go out there with ballots. Hey, you didn't vote last week. Would you like to vote today? And so they would, it's in a very effective way. And the Republicans have picked up on this in California. They have the vote harvesting, and the Democrats are all mad out there because some Republican candidates really figure out how to do it. So they go out and they harvest their own votes. They find out who's most likely to vote Republican. They didn't vote.
Yeah.
And so they got like a week to go out there and talk these people into filling out a ballot. Now, of course, it leads to a lot of, in theory, coercion.
Yeah.
But what was my point? My point is, I think most, 20 years ago, you have 50% turnout. People say, oh, it's terrible. 50% of people voted. Well, if you talk to the 50% that didn't vote, they just didn't care enough, And when you look at like city council, like I know a lot about local government law or local government practice, most of the time people don't even want to come to a meeting. There'll be meeting after meeting for months on end, where you'll have maybe one or two people show up just because they're curious or they have something on the agenda that affects them personally. But people don't attend meetings unless and until somebody in the city screws up something big. And then they're like, you guys are the dumbest people in the world. And they have a point, but there's no reason to participate if you don't know. Like I'll ask people, hey, did you vote? No, I didn't vote. How come? Well, I didn't even know any of the candidates. Yeah. Well, those people are just voluntarily making the right decision. They know they shouldn't vote. It would just be pulling a name out of a hat for them.
Well, this goes back to the beginning of this season when we were talking about ancient Greece and sort of the differences here. It's not that our lives are on the line now to vote. It's not that whoever wins becomes a despotic leader.
Yes.
Hopefully. At this point, maybe we're getting close, but this idea that, it's not 100% necessary for everybody to vote. We have the freedom not just to vote, but also the freedom to not vote.
Yes.
And I think that's an important distinction.
And so I don't think it's necessary to have multiple votes for the people that are active. I think if we just stopped forcing people to vote or really encouraging them, I don't have a problem with people saying, hey, you should vote, you should be active. But it should always be, you should find out about the issues and then vote. Yeah. That's what our message should always be. And that's a great message because I want everybody who's informed to vote. Well, I want to be the only voter. But if I'm not the only voter, I think it's a good civic message to say, find out about the issues and vote. Let's have your intelligent, well-informed vote heard. I don't want some knucklehead going in there now. Who the heck are these people? I don't even know what these issues are. But of course, a lot of people do vote that way.
I mean, I think generally your point is like if we don't encourage anybody, then the only people who go are those most interested in politics and therefore the most likely to know.
Correct.
On a basic
and
level.
They may be wrong. Yes. I'm not saying that you get the right results every time, but at least they knew who they were voting for or at least had an idea, And there are times I'll go in a ballot box, even myself, and I usually read up. I usually even look at sample ballots online before I vote. But there are a couple of times I'm like, I don't know. Well, like in April, there'll be a vote. I don't know if there's multiple candidates, but there may be a vote for the Festus Special Road District, which is the unincorporated area around city of Festus that gets some highway dollars. If you go out our subdivision, go on Harrison Lake Road, you'll notice it in the winter that they use cinders with salt, and so it'll be like, what cinders are, those little black things. But Festus doesn't. So you'll see at the borderline of the Festus Special Road District, that's where it starts and it goes out to Highway A and I think over A. And it's also in Herculaneum, some areas. I'm not even sure where it is. I don't even know what the boundaries of the Festus Special Road District are, but I may be voting on who's going to run it. But I'm not informed on that. I don't care. I just don't care. But I think there might be only one guy on there. So, I mean... and if I don't know the names, a lot of times I won't even vote because I don't know. I don't care. If I've never heard any scandal from the Festus Special Road District. It's really a pass-through organization. But in any event, even I will not vote on stuff if I know I'm not informed. And I like to think that I should have a voice in things. And so, let people not vote. That's the way to do it.
Very true.
I want a less than 10% turnout for the president.
Is that the 0.0001%, and that is just you?
Yeah. Well, that's I want. Yeah. I mean, that'd make me dictator. I'll be the only candidate and the only voter.
That's great.
The rest of you do what I say.
Back to John Stuart Mill. His third opinion to get there. He advocated for the transferable vote system of Thomas Hare. This idea that if your first choice candidate doesn't find favor, then your second choice may, and so on. But this required multi-member electoral districts. So it's kind of an upheaval of essentially the entire British system of voting.
They're doing that now. Like in Alaska, they had ranked choice voting. And I think Oregon, so some of these other jurisdictions are trying this where you get your second and third choice. I think it would be better to have, I mean, we could talk about this if you want to. I just thought it was just kind of a stupid thing, but to even talk about is essentially ranked choice voting. But, I would almost like to have two candidates. Like, I kind of like the runoff system they have in Georgia where, the top two vote getters in either party, if you don't get 50% of the vote, you go to a runoff. And so, like, if you had six people, it's like three Democrats, however you do. Yeah, because they had a mixed election. It's like their general election, it has multiple candidates in it. If you don't get, because they had a libertarian or something in there. But anyway, I like to have a third option. So candidate A, candidate B, and it should be neither. And if neither gets 50%, those two would be forever barred from being a candidate for any office again. And you say, well, you can't do that. Yeah, you can, because if you get impeached, in the state of Missouri at least, if you're impeached, like you're a mayor and they impeach you and they convict you and remove you from office, you can never be a candidate again. For any municipal office. So I think if you can't, between the two of you, you can't get 50% of the vote, you should be barred from ever being a candidate for public office, down to dog catcher, not that there's any elected officials, dog catchers, to president. You're just barred because you're so reprehensible and you are such a failure as a candidate. Anyways, I think that, and there'd be a real stick to it too. But if you can get 50% of the people to say no, because then if you have a really, like, let's say it's Biden-Trump redo. And I'm not saying I'm fed up with Trump, but I'm getting closer. But I know I'm fed up with Biden. I might vote for neither.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of Biden voters are going to vote neither with the hope that there'll be a combined vote to do 50% neither and bar
just
Trump.
Get Trump out.
Yeah, get Trump. They don't want Biden to run for it. He's going to die next week anyway. So really the safe bet is let's try to get 50% on neither and you bump them both out.
Good thinking. Yeah. I like that.
We need to amend the Constitution because we keep getting stuck with these terrible candidates on both sides. And we all like throw up our hands, oh, this is terrible. We get choice between bad and worse. Let's get a third option in there. Kick them both to the curb. All right.
Speaking of party systems.
I got to put that down. That's in my book.
There you go.
Chapter 3, none of the above.
None of the above. John Stuart Mill thought the purpose of the parliamentary system was misunderstood. He says that members of parliament are supposed to establish a government more able than themselves to conduct affairs. He says some form of legislative commission should devise legislation and propose it to parliament, who then accepts or rejects it. He then goes on to say that he did not believe it was a country's mission to acquire vast territories, but believed that what colonies had been acquired should be kept until they are ready for independence and self-government. One more idea with this was that he was passionate about decentralization, but didn't strongly favor federalism. He had a strong sense of the importance of national identity in unifying a country. I'm going to find my quote here. He says, the danger in democratic societies was that a passive populace would get used to allowing the national government to do everything for it, and that was the death of progress.
Amen, brother. We're there.
It also exacerbated the liberticide tendencies of mass society. The remedy was to devolve responsibility as deeply into society as possible. Knowledge should be centralized and responsibility decentralized. This would permit local democracy and inculcate self-reliance in the public.
I disagree with his knowledge should be centralized because I think that's really where you get a despot. That's where they're trying to control our language and they're changing the definition of words. I'm going to have to buy more dictionaries that are like 10 years old because they're changing our language. I want to be able to say, oh, that's not the meaning of that word. A man is... What is a woman? Let's look it up. Wait, that's not it. How did the Webster Merriam Dictionary define a woman as that? That's not a woman. That's some sort of freak.
Well, speaking of women, we move into the last section with the subjection of women.
Now that brings up... Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
No, he's summarizing because he's talking about the women should have a right to vote and have equal rights as men. Did I just summarize it? Did I do it good? I mean,
I'll go into more detail. He says that utilitarianism struggles in handling equality. He says inequalities that create happiness are good, so therefore one can argue that women are happy the way things are without suffrage. He says only at the very end of the essay, The Subjection of Women, does Mill turn to utilitarianism. Because his argument is essentially that if given the same opportunities in education, there is nothing in the nature of women to suggest that they would not flourish in academic or intellectual roles. He says the argument that women have failed to produce intellectual roles, philosophers, doctors, lawyers, is very invalid because women just have not had the ability to do so. He says Mill's passion for a life of a free and self-forming individual makes him a strong critic of social habits that result in women occupying inferior positions. He says here his final argument in the book consists of a simple appeal to his male readers. Would they sacrifice the freedom they had acquired as adults for any amount of the comfort they had enjoyed as children? If the answer was obviously no, they had no business. Yes. They had no business refusing to women the freedom they so passionately wanted for themselves.
You wouldn't want the life of a child?
I might. I don't know.
I think there would be a lot of people who are like, yeah, I give up all these freedoms. You just take care of me. You feed me. I go out and play. I go to school. I go to play. And then I go to bed. You cook me dinner. I go to bed. I get up in the morning. I go to school. I go to play. And
you cook me dinner.
Like that's what he's saying. He's saying, would you give up your freedoms to act like, because women were treated like children. They were considered, they had to be taken care of, and they didn't have an independent intellect in order to be equal members of society. That was the argument. And so I think this argument fails, though, for 90% of American men. Like, that'd be a great life. Would it be great to give up all responsibility, act like a child?
Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree too heavily.
Anyway, that was my argument against that. But I think, anyway, go ahead. Do you have other thoughts on that?
Not on the subjection of women. I have a couple more notes, but if you want to get your out of the way.
No,
all right.
I had like 3 rants I was going to do, but it's getting long.
It is getting long. Right. He says that Mill was also very skeptical of human nature. He says the weakness of conservatives was to mistake custom for nature, believing that what is happening right now is just essentially what is human nature. He also believed that society was in danger of overdoing the disciplinary process in socializing children. He believed that, currently, essentially, the society gets the benefit of the doubt against the dissident individual. He said trust society more so. But Mill really strongly believed that the dissident individual should get the benefit of the doubt against society at large.
He was a man of his times when it comes to the discipline at schools and education, because it was a whole different system than it is now. It's very, very restrictive than it is. This doesn't really hold up now in our current permissive society and educational system.
Very true. Well, that was a brief summary of utilitarianism in John Stuart Mill's ideas, I suppose. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share? Some summarizing opinions?
No, I better stop.
You better stop?
Yes. I have a couple other thoughts, but they're a little off topic. So
yes, a little off topic.
I won't punish our listener anymore.
Yes. Well, I think I agree with John Stuart Mill the farther away that he gets from utilitarianism.
Yes.
I think the whole system of utilitarianism is just awful. I think there's no way in which it works. Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I interrupted you. I didn't mean.
Well, I think that no matter what, you are placing too much power. Like if you were actually to implement a utilitarian system, you are inherently placing way too much power in some council, some group of people who are deciding what makes people happy. And once you give the people that power, then they decide everything that happens in society.
Well, true, but he also believed in a representative government within that framework. So.
But I think that undermines the utilitarian society. If I vote for somebody, who would inherently, be limiting the happiness of the majority of people, then I think in a truly utilitarian system, that person should be just automatically removed.
Yes. Yeah. It'd be hard to define, but there'd have to be some sort of rule or procedure that you couldn't even do that in the first place. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, because I think it's impossible. Because I think. Well, I mean, it's a utopian idea, I think, a really utilitarian framework, but I think just overall, it just doesn't function.
Yeah, I like it better as a descriptive, like I said, as a descriptive model of a society's values, which are it's kind of like a non-denominational way to look at, religion in a particular society. When you're analyzing what are our values and how do they, move over time or change over time, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I completely agree, and I think he's just such a great writer with regard to freedom of speech. I just respect him so much for that because he was really at the forefront of that. Yeah. Early on and very strong, and you can pull out quotes from a whole bunch of his writings that are really, really great now and are needed now. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's. I've gone on like 5 rants on it already. There's no defined values, and of course he's agnostic at best, and so he's not going to be able to appeal to God or some sort of authority. And that's in some ways it's an easy out to come up with a moral framework, but boy, it's really, really hard to come up with a fundamental moral philosophy just based on intellect.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that time and time again. And it's because, like, he even acknowledges that human nature is contradictory. Our interests are contradictory. Our happiness is contradictory. How do we happy from this one thing to happen one day, but then the next day we're unhappy with it?
Well, that's another thing I wanted to mention earlier about utilitarianism, is that because, just two different persons' ideas of happiness are so different, that promoting one's can harm the other person's. And it's like, well, the idea of utilitarianism favor the majority here, but I think, in those utilitarian distinctions, you're inherently harming somebody else.
Right.
I think no matter what, if you're just cutting it into numbers of what makes the most people happy, whatever, if you can find a way to even define that,
right.
It's so much like just favoring the quote unquote better option, but it always, has negative consequences.
Yeah. And then, and even within the individual, your idea of happiness is going to change. Like right now, I bet you I could eat 2 pounds of M&Ms. I mean, if it was just right now, I think I could eat 2 pounds of them. I'm sure
I should just cut the episode there, just not let you finish. That's the final thought.
Tomorrow, probably the same. Third day, I'm going to have problems with it. And fourth day, it's going to be a chore. Fifth day, I'm going to hate it. But it's the same activity. That's an obvious example, but it's really true of all of us. I mean, we get into ruts, or we get into, one thing that brings us happiness today, it's kind of like the changing of the seasons.
Yeah.
You love spring for a while, and then it's a hay fever. And then you love summer for a while, and then it's too hot. And then you love the fall, but then it's too wet. And then you love this, we want it to change. And then it's the winter, but then it's too cold. And, when's the summer ever you get here again? The human nature is in our happiness, in our satisfaction, what we value of our quality of life changes minute to minute, day to day, season to season, and a utilitarian calculation can't take that up, especially when you get to bigger issues. Like, my values have changed over my lifetime. I have different values now than I did when I was your age. And so how do you account for that? And because I was either wrong then or wrong now, or maybe wrong both times, and maybe in 10 years I'll be finally right, but if you're just trying to figure out happiness or some sort of calculation of what it means to be in my best interests, without any sort of structural basis, either religion or otherwise, or just asserting it's a natural right to have certain things, it's really amorphous. It's like trying to define a cloud.
True. Very true. Yeah. Do you have any other final thoughts?
Other than that, it's great. Any other final thoughts from you?
I don't think so. I think we've talked about utilitarianism to a great extent. It's been an hour and 20 minutes.
It went by like an hour 40. No, I'm just joking. No, it actually went by quick. I thought we were shorter today.
It did go by quick.
Yeah, I'm glad I saved my last 2 rants.
Yes, that was great. Well, listeners out there, you can still win an Unlimited Opinions t-shirt.
No more comments?
No more.
Or no any comments?
No any comments or reviews, I guess I should say. If you leave a review.
I'm surprised your brother didn't make a comment.
Who? Which one?
The oldest one. Oh. But he wouldn't put himself out there.
He wouldn't put himself out there, no. He doesn't listen to
this. I'm going to listen to that stupid show.
Well, if you leave us a review on basically any podcast platform and then let us know where you left the review, we will get you a free Unlimited Opinions Seasons 3 and 4 t-shirt. So
there was one person that admitted to listening to us recently, and I think that listener should make some sort of comment.
I think she should too.
Oh, you identified the person's gender, which was going to be my rant. Yeah.
Okay.
It was going to be a gender rant, and just tying in a whole bunch of nonsensical, common events type stuff into his theories about equality of the sexes and stuff.
All right. Well, we should wind things down.
Yeah, because I'm about to light up again.
The gears are turning. We got to end it. But I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
This has been Season 4, Episode 20 of Unlimited Opinions.
Dodged a bullet on that.
I know. We gotta stop it quick.